Hello, today I'm going to read Alex Rider Undercover 4 Secret Files by Anthony Horowitz. This is one of the World Book Day books and there's 4 different stories in here. I'm going to read an Alex Rider story, The Man with the Wrong Shoes. What's happened so far is the head teacher, Henry Bray, has received money to build a new science block, because the last one was burnt down under suspicious circumstances over the summer holidays, and a politician has just arrived at the school to talk to the children and to the local press. Like everyone else at Brooklyn that day, Alex Rider was not looking forward to missing class in order to stand out in the schoolyard listening to some politician lecturing them from behind a microphone. Ever since MI6 had entered his life, he'd missed enough school anyway. First there'd been his visit to Sale Enterprises down in Cornwall and his encounter with the deadly Stormbreaker computers. And just when he thought it was all over, he had been packed off to France pretending to be the son of a billionaire businessman called Sir David Friend. That had also been a near-death experience with Dr. Grief, which had not ended well. As he walked out the dining hall following lunch, he felt a strong twinge of guilt. Nobody in the school knew what he had been going through in the past months, working reluctantly for MI6. That was the part of his new world that he most disliked, having to lie to his friends. Nor could he tell anyone that he was at least partly responsible for the destruction of the science block. Julius Grief had wanted to kill him, and he would have cheerfully burnt down the entire school to achieve his aim. Like it or not, it was Alex who had brought him here. And now he was having to join 3 year groups to listen to some local politician boasting about his achievements. Alex was fed up with politics. It often seemed to him that if he was as noisy and rude as half of the people he saw in Parliament, he would be thrown out of school without a second thought. He had just seen Jasper Milvain on TV, angrily waving his finger at a crowd of climate change protesters, absolutely convinced that he knew more than all the world's scientists, and Alex wasn't looking forward to seeing that politician this afternoon. "At least we're missing history," Tom Harris, his best friend at Brooklyn, had said. "I like history," Alex replied. "It's just killing and wars and kings and queens. I mean, who cares if this Spanish Armada took place in 1688? Actually, I think it was 1588. That's my point. What difference does it make?" Alex wasn't in the mood to argue, and anyway, just then they were interrupted by a tall, curly-haired man who was coming the other way, pushing between them. Alex had met him a couple of times. His name was Kevin Doyle, a supply teacher who had only been at Brooklyn a few months. He was working in the English department and had volunteered to direct the school play. This year it was going to be Macbeth, and Tom had been cast as the porter. Mr. Doyle looked miserable, sweating in a jacket that was too warm for the weather and carrying a bulging backpack. He was obviously in a hurry, but he still stopped and turned to the 2 boys. "Harris, I hope you've learnt your lines by now." "I'm working on them, sir." "For heaven's sake, Harris, you've only got 1 scene. And I'm very disappointed in you too, Ryder. You didn't even audition." While the auditions had been taking place, Alex had been in France, being chased down the ski slopes by men on 700cc snowmobiles with built-in machine guns. But he didn't tell the teacher that. "Maybe next year," he said. "If I'm here." Doyle took out a handkerchief and wiped his forehead. Then he continued on his way. The 2 boys watched him go. "What's wrong with him?" Tom asked. "He looks scared to death." "Maybe he's seen your acting," Alex said. Half an hour later, over 200 children streamed out of the school and took their places on one side of the schoolyard, facing the podium where Milvain would speak. When the politician addressed them, he would have his back to the library and the fenced-off, soon-to-be rebuilt science block site would be right in front of him. The whole event could have been staged deliberately, and probably had. The politician was not outside yet. He was having a coffee with the head teacher, but half a dozen press journalists and a camera crew stood waiting. On the other side of the fence, construction workers were going about their business as if nothing unusual was happening. The crane was hoisting a short steel girder up towards the roof. A couple of engineers were in discussion with the site foreman. The hammering of a pneumatic drill was occasionally erupting in short bursts somewhere inside. Two heavy-set security men stood on either side of the gate, watching the crowd carefully. Alex joined his friends, standing in orderly lines, everyone dressed in their best school uniforms. Mr. Bray had made an announcement at assembly the day before. No crooked ties, no shirts outside trainers, and no trainers. Everyone had to look their best, not for Jasper Milvain, but for the local press. At least the weather was good. The sun was shining and there was a light breeze. The only thing missing was the MP. He often behaved this way. The longer he kept people waiting, the more impressive his entrance would seem. Several Brooklyn teachers were standing in the yard, keeping an eye on things, but even they didn't complain when the students began to fidget and talk amongst themselves. They probably wanted the whole thing to be over too. Alex would genuinely have preferred to be doing history. He glanced through the fence at the burnt-out building surrounded by scaffolding and thought once again of his final encounter with Julius Grief, the clone searching for him. His face twisted with anger, the gun, the flames. He felt uncomfortable being here. He just wanted to go home. And then he saw something. A man had come out of one of the plastic cabins on the edge of the construction site. He was dressed just like the other workers, blue overalls, a fluorescent vest, a brightly coloured helmet. If he'd simply continued forward, Alex might not have noticed him. But he had hesitated, looking left and right as if he was checking that he hadn't been seen. And that made him stand out. A moment later he began walking, but now Alex had him in his sights, and he noticed something else. The man had the wrong shoes. Alex had been on building sites before. In fact, that was where his journey to Point Blanc Academy had begun, coming up against two drug dealers near Putney Bridge. He knew that everyone on a building site had to wear safety boots with steel toe caps and reinforced soles. The man who was making his way across the site kept his head low and was trying not to be seen. He was wearing ordinary loafers. What did it mean? Just then a door opened in the side of the school and Jasper Milvain walked out next to the head teacher, Henry Bray. He had 2 protection officers with him and several advisors. He waved cheerfully to the crowd and climbed onto the platform in front of the library. Before he began speaking, he waited for the applause to stop, although, in fact, there was no applause. Perhaps he just imagined it. "Good afternoon," he said. The man on the building site had disappeared. Alex briefly glanced at the visiting politician, and when he turned his head back, there was no sign of him. And suddenly he knew that danger was close by. He didn't have much evidence, just the way the man had hesitated and the fact he was wearing ordinary shoes. But if there was one thing his uncle had taught him, it was that sometimes instinct was enough. The spies who hesitated, who waited for absolute proof before they took action, were easily recognised. They were the dead ones. "Alex! What are you—" Tom had called out to him, but it was already too late. Alex had broken away from the crowd and was sprinting round the side of the yard towards the fence. He might be wrong, he might be making a fool of himself, but he was determined to find out what was going on. He couldn't run through the gate. The two security guards would not let him pass between them. Alex had seen their type before, all muscle but not much brain. It would take him too long to explain why he was worried, and anyway they wouldn't believe him. He wasn't completely sure that he believed himself. How was he to get in? The gate was impossible. The fence was too high. He glanced over his shoulder. Miss Bedfordshire, the school secretary, had seen him disappearing and was whispering something to Mr. Bray, the head teacher, as the two of them stood next to the podium. Would they send someone after him? The thought made him move all the faster, following the fence round, wondering if he could find another entrance. As he continued, he was aware of a large vehicle rumbling past. A moment later, it was right next to him, and it wasn't just large, it was elephant size. A cement mixer truck with a massive steel mixing drum that was rotating slowly, even as it moved forward on 6 wheels. A ladder ran up to a platform next to the hopper, which was shaped like the lip of an oversized jug that would be tilted downwards to allow the cement to pour into the discharge chute. Alex was already running before he had worked out exactly what he was going to do. The cement truck had overtaken him, but it was still moving fairly slowly, and in just half a dozen strides he was right next to it, reaching out to grab hold of the ladder. As his hand closed around one of the lower rungs, he was almost pulled off his feet, but somehow he managed to cling on as he was lifted clear off the surface of the road. Gritting his teeth, he pulled himself upwards, climbing the ladder unseen by the driver. Once he was at the top, he would be able to jump over the fence. That was the idea. But there was a problem. The ladder was on the wrong side of the truck, and to position himself next to the fence, he would actually have to stand on top of the mixing drum itself. That wouldn't be easy with the truck rumbling forward. But worse still, the drum was still rotating. Alex could actually hear the liquid cement slurping around inside. It was like going to be on a treadmill in the gym. Alex would have to run sideways to simply keep still, and if he missed his footing, he would be thrown back down onto the ground. He might break his neck, or he might be swept underneath one of the giant wheels and be crushed. He reached the top of the ladder and stood on the platform. Once again he glanced back. Everyone was watching Milvain, who was well into his speech. Nobody was looking at him. Meanwhile, the truck had almost reached the end of the fence. If Alex was going to act, he had just seconds in which to do it. This was the tricky part, the do or die moment. Taking a breath, he stepped off the platform and onto the revolving drum. Now he had to time everything perfectly. He could feel the metal surface sliding away beneath his feet, threatening to drag him backwards to his death. Judging the exact speed, he half walked, half ran in the opposite direction, keeping himself in the same position. The fence was on the other side, about 2 meters away. He estimated that he was about 7 meters up, about the height of a classroom. The ground on the other side was rough, covered in gravel. Get this wrong, and all he would have managed to achieve was a broken leg.